It started as just another quiet morning in a small-town diner, the kind where the smell of bacon and coffee clung to the walls. At a corner booth, an 81-year-old black veteran sat alone, stirring his cup with the same steady hand that once held a rifle for his country. No one paid much attention, until the door swung open and a man with a leather jacket and anger in his eyes walked in. What happened next silenced the entire diner. A single slap echoed across the room, a moment of cruelty that froze time. But what no one expected was who would walk through that same door just 1 hour later, and how justice would arrive wearing a patch of flames and wings. The diner had always been his. Sanctuary, a simple place where mornings started with black, coffee and memories of a life long lived. James Holloway, an 81-year-old veteran, came here every day after sunrise. The waitresses knew his order by heart, and the regulars often nodded in quiet respect to the man who once fought overseas when his own country didn't always fight for him. That morning was calm, the kind of peace James cherished. The world outside felt distant, just the hum of engines from the highway and the low murmur of breakfast chatter. But even in places like this, peace can be fragile. A group of men pulled up on roaring motorcycles, their laughter sharp, their presence heavy. They weren't locals. Their jackets carried patches and symbols that spoke of defiance and dominance. James didn't look their way. He had learned long ago that dignity was its own form of resistance. But the air shifted when one of them, young, brash, the kind who thought cruelty proved strength, caught sight of the old man sitting alone. The thug smirked, nudging his buddies before walking straight toward James's booth. Conversations quieted. Eyes followed. The tension was thick, unspoken, and then came that single gut-wrenching moment that no one in that diner would ever forget. The sound of the slap wasn't just skin against skin, it was history repeating itself, an echo of every time respect was stolen from someone who had earned it tenfold. The biker sneered, muttered something under his breath, and left James sitting there, shaking but silent. But while the others in the diner stayed frozen in their seats, something else was already in motion. Fate, timing, and a storm that would soon roll in wearing leather and loyalty. The world has a way of balancing itself, even if it takes the most unexpected hands to do it. Word travels fast in small towns, even faster when something cruel happens in plain sight. By noon, whispers had spread beyond the diner's walls, about the old man who had been struck, about the silence that followed. Some said the biker had laughed as he walked out. Others said he didn't look back at all. But one thing was certain, the people who had seen it couldn't shake the image. Shame has a way of echoing louder than noise. James sat quietly long after the incident, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. He'd survived worse, wars, marches, years of being told to stay silent. But this felt different. It wasn't the pain that lingered. It was the indifference, the way no one stood up. Not even the waitress, not the man at the counter who looked away. For James, the slap was just a reminder that some battles never end. They only change shape. Across town, at a local garage, a group of riders were finishing their repairs. The Hells Angels chapter was known for their rough exteriors, but among them was a man who carried a quiet fire behind his eyes. Marcus Holloway, James's son. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, maybe years, their relationship fractured by time and stubborn pride. But when one of the younger riders scrolled through his phone and said, "You see this old vet that got slapped over at Miller's Diner?" The world stopped for Marcus. The description was unmistakable. His chest tightened, the noise of the garage fading into a hum. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket, the one marked with fire and wings, and motioned to his crew. "We're going for lunch," he said simply. As they roared down the highway, wind cutting through the silence, Marcus didn't just carry rage, he carried memory. Every lesson his father had ever taught him about respect, strength, and restraint clashed with the blood pounding in his veins. He didn't know what he would say when he got there, or what he would do. But he knew one thing for certain. No one lays a hand on his father and walks away proud. The diner bell jingled again just after 1 o'clock. But this time the sound didn't bring in a stranger. It brought in a storm. The glass door swung open, and the sunlight caught the gleam of leather patches stitched with fire and wings. The low rumble of engines outside hadn't yet faded when Marcus Holloway stepped in, his crew behind him, the air thick with tension and gasoline. Conversations died instantly. The same people who had watched in silence an hour ago now sat frozen, feeling the weight of consequence entering the room. Marcus scanned the diner, eyes sharp, steady, searching. Then he saw him, his father, still in the same booth, hands folded, coffee cold. Age had bent the old man slightly, but not his dignity. For a brief moment, Marcus's anger cracked, replaced by something heavier. Regret, guilt, love he never said out loud. But the sight of his father's bruised cheek reignited the fire. The waitress's hand trembled as she poured coffee, glancing at the group. Everyone knew why they were there. One of the bikers from earlier, the same thug who'd thrown the slap, sat back at the counter, laughing nervously with his friends, oblivious to the storm at his back. The moment he turned and locked eyes with Marcus, the laughter died. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked forward, each step measured, like a soldier crossing a battlefield he already owned. The diner seemed to shrink around him. The thug stood trying to muster the same arrogance he had shown before, but it faltered beneath the silent, united stare of men who lived by a code: loyalty, respect, brotherhood. Marcus stopped inches away. The air was electric, heavy with the kind of justice that doesn't need words. The young man's smirk collapsed under the weight of his own cowardice. His jaw tightened, but his hands trembled. The same hands that had struck an old man without fear now struggled to stay still beneath Marcus's stare. The diner was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the muffled ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second felt stretched, drawn tight between vengeance and restraint. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady, a whisper that carried more weight than a shout ever could. You touched a man who's seen more war than you'll ever imagine. You disrespected someone who earned the right to peace. The words didn't need to be loud. They cut deeper because of how calm they were. The younger man's eyes darted away, shame coloring his face. The bravado was gone, stripped bare in front of everyone. Without another word, Marcus stepped back, giving the thug space to leave. But before he could, one of Marcus's crew quietly moved aside, blocking the door. Not to trap him, but to make him face the room one last time. The message was clear: this wasn't revenge. It was accountability, the kind that forces you to stand in your own reflection and recognize what you've done. The thug finally stumbled toward the door, his head lowered. As he passed James's booth, he hesitated, maybe to mutter an apology, maybe just to escape. But James didn't look up. He didn't need to. Dignity, after all, doesn't answer to cruelty, it survives it. When the door closed behind the men, the diner stayed frozen in that stillness that follows a storm, shaken yet cleansed. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his hands unclenching, his breath finally slowing. He turned to his father, and though no words passed between them, something long broken began to mend. The unspoken bond between them, one forged by history, pride, and pain, had quietly rebuilt itself in that silence. That's when the waitress, who'd been trembling at the counter, poured a fresh cup of coffee and brought it to James's table. Her hands still shook as she set it down, but her eyes met his. "On the house," she whispered. It wasn't just kindness, it was acknowledgement. The kind that says, I should have done more. As Marcus and his crew turned to leave, the room finally exhaled. The air felt different now. Lighter, honest. The kind of air that follows truth spoken without a word. And outside, beneath the glaring sun, the engines roared to life, signaling not just the end of confrontation, but the beginning of understanding. Outside, the engines idled in a low, steady growl, a heartbeat that echoed through the parking lot. Inside, Marcus stood still, the weight of the moment slowly lifting. The diner's air, once suffocating with tension, now felt light, almost fragile. He glanced once more at his father, a silent exchange of strength passing between generations. The past and present had collided in that diner, and somehow they both walked away, changed. James finally rose from his seat, his steps deliberate, his eyes never leaving his son. For decades, he had faced the world's cruelty alone, with restraint, with grace, with the quiet discipline of a man who'd seen too much war to believe in easy justice. But now, watching his son stand not in anger but in control, he realized that maybe the next generation could carry the same fire without being consumed by it. The waitress wiped the counter with shaking hands, her eyes glistening with something like relief. Around the diner, a few patrons shifted uncomfortably, the shame of their earlier silence pressing on them. They had witnessed racism unfold, done nothing, and now faced a mirror reflecting their inaction. Marcus didn't need to say a word. His presence had spoken for every person who'd been told to endure humiliation quietly. When the bikers finally rode off, their engines fading into the distance, a strange calm settled over the town. People would talk about what happened that day, not just the slap, but what came after. They would remember the look on the old man's face when his son arrived. They would remember that justice didn't always come in fists or fury, but sometimes in quiet reckoning. James and Marcus walked out together side by side for the first time in years. The wind caught the diner's flag outside, making it snap and flutter, red, white, and blue against the clear afternoon sky. The old man paused, looking up at it with tired eyes. "We fought for that," he whispered softly. Marcus nodded. "And we still are." As they rode away, father and son both knew the world hadn't changed overnight. But that day, in one small corner of it, silence had been broken. And sometimes that's where change begins. Because racism doesn't always fall to the loudest voices. It falls to those who refuse to look away.